Hello and welcome to Watch Me Edit, the series where I will edit the raw picture to the fully retouched photo and hopefully give you guys some ideas, some inspiration. So I've taken this photo last summer on the Quiraing on the Isle of Skye in Scotland. It's a really beautiful and awesome place to go, especially if you're a photographer. It was definitely my favorite place of the whole journey. So today I'm gonna show you how I turn something like this into something like this. If you are looking for a guide in Lightroom on how to edit landscapes, I have made a 30-minute video on that where I explain everything, every adjustment, every slider in detail and why I adjust those settings. But for the Watch Me Edit series I will just kinda go a bit faster, not explain everything so in detail. So if you're interested in the full tutorial you can click on this video I'm gonna blind in right here, or you can check the links in the description below. Alright, so without further ado, let's get started. First thing I'm gonna do is bring down the highlight sliders, as I do with most of my landscapes. Then it's kinda dark in the shadows, so I'm gonna bring up the shadows. Let's see how much. I might even bring them up 100. Yeah, I think 100 works pretty well. Then I'm gonna bring down the black points. Hold down the Alt key to see wherever the blacks are clipped, kinda switch between the two modes and see whatever looks best. That looks pretty good. Now with the whites I'm gonna do the same as I did with the blacks, just in the opposite direction. Just bring them up, hold down the Alt key and see wherever they're clipped. That looks pretty good. And then I'm gonna play around with the clarity a bit. Just see what it does to the different parts of the picture. I don't think I'm gonna add too much clarity to the whole image. Maybe just a tiny bit, around 8. Then contrast. See what works best. I definitely think I'm gonna add some plus contrast. Something like that. Around 40. Then I think the overall exposure is pretty well, so I'm not gonna change anything there. And the color temperature, let's see if there's something I like better than the one it was at. I think it could use a tiny bit of warmth. That looks pretty good for this particular image, like 6200. Then the tint, gonna play around with this as well. I don't think I'm gonna change too much there. Yeah, I think I'm gonna leave it at default and reset that. I'm not gonna change any vibrance or saturation right now, that's maybe something I'm gonna change later. So let's get down here to the tone curve. I always bring the highlights on this tone curve slider up, and I actually think I'm gonna bring down the whites a tiny bit, just because it kinda looks overexposed even though it technically is not overexposed. There's still detail in the whites, but I think that looks way better than this one before. So I'm gonna go down to the tone curve, bring up the highlights on the tone curve. Other than the highlight slider up here, this will just affect the very highlights of the picture, whereas the highlight slider up here adjusts pretty much all of the bright spots in the entire image. So I'm gonna bring that up a tiny bit. Let's just see how much, not that much. I'm gonna play around with the lights, maybe tiny bit of plus lights, then darks. Don't think gonna play around with darks too much, maybe also give it a tiny bit of a plus. The shadows, I think I'm gonna leave the shadows where they were. Down at the HSL tool I'm gonna click this little button next to the hue. I'm gonna drag it to the greens and pull down and up the mouse to see what color I like best. I think a bit more yellowish color works pretty well. Like something like that. This was before, that's the after, really not a big difference. Then down to the saturation tool I'm gonna do the same. Also drag it up and down and see if it needs a bit more saturation. Maybe a tiny bit. Yeah, something like that looks pretty well. Luminance, same as the two above. I think I'm gonna add a lot of luminance actually. I really like what it does to the look of the grass down here. Here's without any luminance, and here's with. It just adds a little bit more brightness, a bit more variation and contrast to the whole lighting. Then split toning, this is where you can bring some color into the highlights and shadows, but I don't think I'm gonna do too much for this picture here. I'm still gonna try it out. I'm maybe gonna add a little bit of yellow just to make the highlights kind of a bit less bluish, maybe more towards the orange, really not that much, something like that. Here's without any, and here's with, just a tiny difference. Then to the shadows, I'm gonna play around with those as well. I don't think I'm gonna add too much here either, but let's just see if the orange looks kind of okay. I think the orange looks pretty good actually. Again here, just a tiny bit, around 9%. Then the detail slider, I definitely want to make sure I'm zoomed in to 100% so I can see the detail of the image very clearly. Add some sharpening, because I think it could need some sharpening just to make it look a bit sharper. Then masking, I'm gonna zoom out for the masking, hold down the Alt key, and everything that's white is gonna be sharpened, and everything that's black is not gonna be sharpened. So you wanna make sure all of the sky and clouds are not going to be sharpened, because that would just introduce noise. That looks pretty well. Yeah. Noise reduction, I really don't think we need any noise reduction in this particular photo. But what I will do is go in 1:1 again and just check the dark spots and increase the color noise reduction a tiny bit. This just gets rid of all of the sensor noise. The little purple and green parts you can see often in the shadows disappear with that. It's really not a big difference here, but there's definitely something visible up here. Maybe even gonna increase it a tiny bit more. So that's definitely a great tool, and that's something I do with most of my pictures. Lens corrections, enable profile corrections, profile, lens profile, in this case the Canon 18-55, here's without, here's with, just gets rid of all of the vignetting and all of the distortion. Color, remove chromatic aberration, just gets rid of all of the chromatic aberration on the high contrast edges. Here's without, here's with. You really can see it well on these edges. Again, here without and here with. And then we're down here at effects. I'm definitely gonna add some vignetting on this picture. I do this with quite a lot of my landscapes. It just helps to draw the viewer's eye more towards the center of the frame, and of course I want the people to immediately see those shapes instead of those corners that are not very important. Also helps a lot with mood. Then down here at the camera calibration tool, if you have seen my tutorial, you will know that I usually just play around with all of these profiles and all of those sliders. For this video I'm gonna do that quickly off camera and switch back to it once I'm done, just because there's not really anything I can tell you. It's really different with every single image. Alright, so I'm back after adjusting all of those sliders. I ended up turning the camera profile from camera standard to camera faithful, just because I think it works better for this particular mood. Here's standard, and here's faithful. Just gives it a kind of more darkish, bit more contrasty, less greenish look in my opinion, which I personally like for this picture. Alright, so we're done with the global adjustments, so the next thing I'm gonna do is make individual adjustments to the picture. In this case, I think crop would work pretty well for this picture, just because we have so much sky here and there's not really anything interesting going on up here. So I'm gonna go here into the crop module and just kinda crop down a bit of the top and see what works best. I think that works pretty well. Something I will do a lot of times is go into this little custom thingy right here and just choose an industry standard crop, just because it's way easier for print and stuff if you have like a 16:9 or a 4:3 or a 3:2 aspect ratio. Many places won't even print in such individual aspect ratio. So I'm gonna see here what works best to my free aspect ratio I've chosen. 16:10 is kind of too high, so I'm gonna reset that and choose 16:9. Yeah, that's definitely way better. I think that works very well. So I'm gonna press enter to make sure the crop is selected, and I'm gonna move on. So now I'm gonna add a gradient filter and drag it over the sky, and just kind of add a little bit of contrast so it gives a little bit more contrasty cloud, so it looks a bit more dramatic and gives it more variety. I'm also gonna add some clarity. I often like to keep the cloud soft and go minus clarity, but for this case I really think plus clarity works quite well. Yeah, something like that. Then next thing I'm gonna do is select the adjustment brush. Just kind of bring down the exposure a tiny bit, like half a stop. Make sure the feather is to 100. Make sure auto mask is off, and then kind of increase the size. And just kind of add some more custom vignetting just at the bottom here. Something like that. Maybe even remove that up here. Kind of want to make this a bit brighter. And up here in the corners to the dark clouds, and up here. Maybe that's even a bit too much for this one right here. Yeah, I think that works pretty well. So you can see here without any additional vignetting, and here's with additional vignetting. Just kind of gives it a more of a stormy feel, which I really like in this particular case. So the next thing I'm gonna do is some dodge and burning, which means making some individual parts of the image brighter or darker, which has a huge impact to your photo. It's definitely something that will take your pictures to the next level. If you want to know more about dodge and burning and what it is and what it does and more examples, I have made a tutorial about that as well. So just click on the screen right here. So I'm gonna add a radial filter, just kind of drag it very long up here, something like that, and I'm gonna increase the exposure here slightly, and also add some clarity just to kind of give it even more of a pop. I'm gonna duplicate this filter, drag it over here. Maybe something like this. Here I think it could use even more exposure, maybe some contrast. Gonna duplicate this as well, drag it over here. Just trying to make a very natural looking exposure increases. Then I'm gonna duplicate it again, drag it around here, make it a bit bigger, make sure it's not as much. Bit more clarity, and I think I'm even gonna increase the exposure here slightly and add another radial filter here, something like that, but this time I'm gonna go negative exposure a tiny bit and a bit more contrast, just so it complexifies the exposure in the photo even more. So I'm gonna duplicate those as well, kinda put it somewhere like there. I'm gonna duplicate this one again, just kind of make it bigger over here. That looks pretty good. Duplicate it once again and kind of add a bit over here, maybe even a bit more contrast, I think. Yeah, that works pretty well. Then I'm gonna create a new one, just pull over this lake, and this time increase the exposure again, also clarity a bit, and I think I'm gonna add a last one with plus exposure on this tip of the mountain over here. Let's see how this looks. Some clarity. Yeah, I think that looks pretty well. So here is the image without any dodge and burning. and here's with dodge and burning. Just adds so much more dynamic, so much more contrast to the whole picture, makes the whole lighting situations just a bit more interesting. Now the very last thing I would do with all of my pictures is just zoom in 1:1 and just make sure that there aren't any dirt or dust spots anywhere in the frame, and remove them with the spot removal tool if there were any. I think a last thing I'm gonna do is just increase the vibrance a bit, just to give it even more of a pop. I think that works pretty well. So I'm done with my edit. Here is the before. Very dull looking, kind of flat. And here's the after. Very dramatic, very big difference compared to the original raw file. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and leave a thumbs up. If you have any comments or questions, leave them in the comment section down below. And please subscribe to my YouTube channel if you would like to see more videos like this and more photography related videos, Lightroom guides, Lightroom edits, landscape photography videos, all that kind of stuff. If you're interested in that, be sure to subscribe. I really hope I could help you out and give you some inspiration or some ideas, some tips. Thank you so much for watching my video and have an amazing day.